been interesting for me to watch my wife change as we have grown older together. More and more, she seems to have a preoccupation or at least an interest in history. She participates in Muskegon and Cincinnati memory groups on Facebook. She loves it when she finds out more about the history of the roller rink next door and what the downtown looked like years ago. She's developing what some folks would call a historical consciousness. In my own life, after my dad died, I began thinking about where I had come from and who also shared this weird name that we have, Utrecht. I started contacting Utrechts, and by the way, there's none of them that spell it like we do, and that's a long, complicated story, and probably had to do with German stubbornness. But nonetheless, I began contacting Utrechts in all kinds of cities that I had never heard before, and I wanted to know whether they were related to us. Now, I know it was about the passage of time. I know it was probably about aging and death, but whatever it was about, a historical consciousness was increasingly becoming a part of my consciousness. Our Jewish brothers and sisters have always had a big historical consciousness. As they think about their faith, as they tell stories of faith, they often do so in a way that makes it quite clear that what is happening now is deeply connected to what has happened before. It's as if history is not one new development after another, but rather a deep linking of what is transpiring now with what has occurred in the past and probably even what will occur in the future. Israel often wouldn't tell its stories about new developments without tying them to past events or figures from the past. And wow, today on Transfiguration Sunday, we get to see this big time. This is a day that explodes with history. We see that in that fascinating story from 2 Kings, in which the prophet Elijah is passing on the prophetic mantle to his mentee, Elisha. It's no accident, by the way, that the two of them end up in Bethel, where one of the great fathers of Israel, Jacob, had had a significant experience with God, a dream where angels were going up and down a ladder. The great prophets, Elijah, the guy who's been around for Elijah, the guy who's been around for a long time, and Elisha, the one who's about ready to assume the position, go to where the great father in the faith, Jacob, had spent some life-transforming time, had encountered God. Now, in the story today, Elisha and Elijah and 50 more prophets also end up at the River Jordan. Oh, the River Jordan is so significant to the people of Israel, even, I think, as unattractive as it is. The great father in the faith, Joshua, led his people through the waters of the Jordan. He parted the Jordan so that the people could walk through it. And in confronting that story, we might say with the great philosopher Yogi Berra, it's deja vu all over again. Haven't we heard another story? If you haven't, I want to tell you another story of someone parting the waters. You've probably heard that, haven't you? Yes, of course you've heard that. Moses parted the waters. He parted the Sea of Reeds so that his people could escape from the oppressive hands of the Egyptians. You see, Joshua is like Moses. And note what happens in today's reading. Elijah takes his coat, rolls it up, and strikes the water, and the waters of the Jordan part again. Elijah is like Joshua, who is again like Moses. Now, Elisha, the new guy in town, is new, but he is being brought into a grand leadership tradition. His leadership is rooted in the leadership of those who have come before him. In many ways, he's not doing this thing alone. He stands on the shoulders of giants who have preceded him. Now, Mark, in his story about the Transfiguration, makes a similar point. 6 days later, we're not counting days here, folks. 6 days later, that's how many days the mountain was covered by a cloud before Moses could receive the 10 Commandments from God. What is happening today is connected to what has happened before. And that's made clear as Moses and Elijah appear on the mountain with Jesus as he is transformed, as his clothes become dazzling white, such as no one on earth could bleach them. You see, Jesus wouldn't be Jesus apart from Moses or Elijah. Jesus wouldn't be Jesus apart from the great tradition that preceded him, that shaped him. Moses and Elijah are integral to who Jesus is, to who his people are. You can't understand Jesus if you don't get the community that formed him and the tradition that this community passed on. It is hard for us to know who we are if we don't know where we've come from. Now, many people who have been adopted will report this difficulty, or sometimes at least will live in light of it. For many adopted people, something seems to be missing. And I don't say this with any judgment at all. We have an adopted child. And I don't use this as a critique of adopted people. It's just part of the givenness of the situation. We all long to know where we have come from. Figuring out who we are as individuals requires knowing who we are not just as individuals, but as communities. There's an old African adage that says, I am what I am because of who we all are. Now, I have to tell you, this isn't a particularly American notion. We Americans have bought into the so-called bootstrap theory that suggests that who we are as individuals is a consequence of our own efforts. One of the things I've known in the past, but has become crystal clear to me this past week as I've been walking with Bev during her recovery from knee replacement surgery, is that I'm able to do what I am able to do because of what she does. She has made so much possible for me. Bootstrapping generally is a lie. I am who I am because of who we are, and who we are includes a history that has preceded us. Jesus is who Jesus is because of who his people are and because of the history that preceded him. He stands on the shoulders of giants like Moses and Elijah. Now, one of the real struggles of our time, I'm convinced, is that increasingly we ask people to figure out who they are on their own. Too many people, many of us, lack big stories, big traditions that help us make our way into the future. Now, I fully understand, and I'm anticipating some reaction to that line. I fully understand that some big stories throughout history have been used to oppress people. I get that. I know that. And I also get that my big story is not everybody else's big story. But this, I am convinced, we need bigger stories. We need large narratives to place our individual lives in. And sometimes these days, the only story that people live within is the individualistic story, the achievement story, the performance story, the story that says it's all about you and what you accomplish. This puny story often lacks a historical consciousness. It frequently abandons mentors and heroes, big shoulders on which to stand. No wonder so many of us are so anxious. No wonder so many of us struggle emotionally to make our way, because it's all about me. But we as Christians, rooted in the great tradition that is Judaism, believe that it isn't all about me. I am who I am because of who we are. We place ourselves into a community that has a history. It's therefore not just about my story or my achievements. It's who we are together, shaped by our foremothers and our forefathers. And our kids need to learn this story, and we need to know it. You know, the personal achievement story, and I've told it to myself for a long time, it's an interesting story, really. And sometimes it works. It really does. I mean, sometimes you make lots of money, and sometimes your kid ends up on the soccer team at college. But I got to tell you this. It is a short-lived story. You and those who come after you need something bigger. You need something for the long haul. Even Jesus stands on the shoulders of giants. Who Jesus is shaped by who his people are and what his people's history has been. But you know, if I am to be faithful to Transfiguration Day, I can't stop there. I thought about just ending the sermon right there because that was a really good point I just made. I thought maybe it was time to end there, but Mark doesn't stop there today. You'll notice in today's gospel reading that Moses and Elijah disappear from the scene. One of the last verses of our text reads, "Suddenly, when they looked around, they saw no one with them anymore, only Jesus." For Mark, a writer with a great historical consciousness, there is something brand new going on here. Jesus is the new thing. Moses and Elijah, they matter greatly, but there is a new giant who needs to be listened to. Yes, history matters. Yes, we all live in light of a great tradition that has been passed on to us, but you don't want to get lost in history either. You don't want the past to cut you off from the possibilities of a new future. Mark wants you to focus on the new thing, on Jesus, the transfigured one, the one whose face reveals the very heart and glory of God. Now, I don't say this, by the way, with some degree of Christian triumphalism, as it happens in so many places in the church. You know, believe in Jesus or you're all going to hell. That is a tiresome story that really is not in keeping with the tradition or the Bible. In fact, if you see who it is that the light is shining on today, what it is that Jesus said that needs to be listened to, you will never go down that path. The light today is shining on the one who just has taught his disciples that he is going to die. And has just taught them that those who want to follow him must pick up their crosses. The light isn't shining on some triumphal warrior who longs to defeat his enemies and take his own little club of followers off into the sky above and to cast those who don't believe like they do into the outer darkness. No, the light is shining on the one who is heading to the cross, which, by the way, is why we get this reading right before we start Lent. Today, the focus is on one who will not take the easy way, the one who knows that real life, God-shaped life, comes not from protecting the self or defending the self or elevating the self. It comes from letting go of the self and giving it away in service to other people and to the whole community. This is the one upon whose shoulders we stand. This is the story that we need to listen to. Now, honestly, it is a story worth spending a lot of time with because, I got to tell you, we don't naturally get this story. We really don't. So I'm going to invite you. I don't know. Why don't you come away with me into the wilderness for what, 40 days or so to immerse yourself in this cross-shaped story. It won't be a one-day trip, trust me. It can't be. We've got too much to learn. The process will be long and it may be hard, but I trust, especially if the Transfiguration story is in any indication, that the end of the story is going to be light and love and life. Amen.